The final presentation of the day is one that I'm looking forward to because I actually just got to meet the guy yesterday, David Oransky. There's a lot of talk about robo-advising and what it's going to do to our industry and how disruptive it is in fact going to be, which is part of the reason where I kind of started going down that trail as far as pulling this particular conference together. So I contacted the Kinder Institute. George Kinder is his name, and seeing if I could get George Kinder to come. Well, not only could I not afford to have George Kinder come, he was going to be in England at this particular time doing a seminar over there. But they suggested David Oransky, who happened to live in St. Louis, and actually agreed to do this for nothing, which is exactly the price the universities like to pay to have speakers come and speak. David is a certified public accountant and a certified financial planner and a registered life planner, which is, hence, I think, comes from the Kinder Institute. David grew up in Maine, got his education at Santa Clara. Am I remembering this right? Married a young woman from St. Louis. They agreed to move to Chicago so they could be closer to home, and she won. Now they're living in St. Louis. He has a wealth management firm called Laminar. Is that how you would say it? Laminar Wealth Management. As a self-described nerd, I like saying that about people. My kids all think they're nerds. David considers finance books and academic journals to be pleasure reading. In recent years, he's also become fascinated with the non-technical side of financial planning, particularly studies of positive psychology and life planning. Bottom line, David Oransky believes that the client should be the focus of our work as financial planners, and the investments is a necessary evil we have to work with in order to help them reach the goals that they have. Please join me in welcoming David to the platform.
Thank you. So yeah, my background is actually technical. I started as a CPA and then became a financial planner. And so when I initially made the switch from accounting into financial planning, I had some great mentors, and from the beginning, I was told this is a relationship business, which wasn't actually music to my ears because my whole life had been kind of in the books and in the numbers, and that's what initially drew me into this industry. But it made sense. The part that didn't sit right with me was really that it seemed like it was all the Dale Carnegie, how to win friends and influence people, how tactics to sell them the products or even just your advice and how to do that. And so it never quite made sense, but then I came across this framework that really helped understand why relationships are, why they matter so much. It's all built on trust, and what is trust and how do you build it? And really, this isn't my formula, this is from Charlie Green, but it's trustworthy is credibility plus reliability plus intimacy divided by self-orientation, meaning if it's about you, it's not real trust, it's, that's where you get the sales and manipulation and all that. And so through that same framework, we can figure out, why advisors are successful, but also how on earth, if trust and relationships are so important to this industry, why are robo-advisors starting to become so popular? And why are we so scared of them? And it really comes down to the fact, credibility, they have reliability and credibility. But what they don't have, and I think it'll be hard for them to ever get, and where we can differentiate ourselves, is on the intimacy, the value of the relationship, and making sure that it's really about them. And so the problem, though, is right now, most human advisors aren't up to par with the credibility and the reliability in the systems. And so the threat, why are robo-advisors taking off? They're completely transparent. People know exactly what they're getting. They see, all the performance. They see the ingredients that went into it. There's no black boxes. It's endorsed by academics. I mean, so many of them on their boards have the people that literally wrote the book on finance and the ones that are given out, in finance schools. Bert Malkiel and Charlie Ellis and all sorts of them are on there. Extremely low fees. So the value proposition, they don't have to deliver that much to ensure that they're delivering more value than the fees they're charging. They're automated. So talk about reliability. They're going to do, it's all done by an algorithm. They're by definition more reliable than humans. And they've got a modern interface. So this is where they're trying to build that level of communication. In reality, they're doing a better job than most of us in terms of how they're communicating digitally with their clients. So the answer for us is really to leverage technology to make sure that we're at least as good as the robo-advisors on all of those components, and then how to develop the real relationship, which is kind of what the majority of my talk's going to be about. So not being scared of technology, not sticking our heads in the sand and saying this isn't a real threat, but rather using that technology to facilitate connection. Don't think of it as it's creating separation, putting something between you and the client. It's actually bringing you closer together. My practice, so I've moved from California 2 years ago. I was in Chicago for a year, and now I'm in St. Louis. So most of my client base is not in St. Louis. In fact, if it had to be, I would already have been out of business. I'm working with a lot of clients from California. I have clients in Colorado, Massachusetts, in Chicago. And so it's really using video conferencing and all this technology has really allowed me to actually build and maintain relationships remotely. And I would argue that in many cases, the relationship and the depth of it is probably deeper than many human advisors are doing where people are coming into their office. You can also use it to eliminate and reduce barriers. So it takes less time to meet. There's no commuting time. You can live anywhere like you just talked about, and the cost is significantly less. So I started my own practice with zero AUM, with zero everything. I couldn't have done that even probably 5 years ago. It's simply because of this technology that it's completely scalable from day one. So as you're thinking about, what should be done by humans versus machines, anything that can be automated probably should be automated. I mean, machines do really well, do rote tasks extremely well and extremely reliable at a very low cost. And in the Industrial Revolution, it was a huge fixed cost. You had to buy the machinery and the factory to do it before you get the economies of scale. With software, you have economies of scale from the very first user. They develop it once and it works for everybody. And so everything is priced now on a per user, or per client, or per advisor basis, which makes it very easy. And then anything where it's not, or it's either impossible to automate it, or there's just too much of a human thing there, you want to still use technology to bring all the relevant information forth so that then the client or the advisor can make the right decision. So one of the things that technology does really well are, it's extremely cost effective, it does things very efficiently, makes very few errors other than ones that were programmed in by the humans. So for mundane tasks, it does stuff really well. There's certain things that it doesn't do well. Anything that comes down to making a value call, ethics. I mean, a machine just is a calculator. It's all software is. And really making judgment decisions. So that's the area where you still want to, the combination, use the technology to bring forth that relevant information. So think of it, I'm also a pilot, commercial pilot and flight instructor, and I think of it much of like autopilot. When autopilot came on the scene, it actually made flying safer, much more fuel efficient, and you needed less people in the cockpit to manage it. Instead of needing 2 pilots and a navigator, you only needed 2 pilots. And that second pilot was really redundant anyway, just in case the other one had a heart attack. And to communicate if there was some emergency going on. And so the autopilot does things really well, like maintaining altitude, staying on a heading, making certain adjustments for wind. The pilot's still there taking off and landing. They're programming the system, but they're letting the autopilot kind of handle stuff in the background. I would never get on a plane with just an autopilot and no human. And so that's kind of what people are asking them to do with the robo-advisors right now. And the fact that they're doing it means that their other option right now is so not good that they're willing to get on a plane without a human on it. And so it's really, how do we get everything up to par with that and then figure out where we can really differentiate on the human side of it. So a few examples of leveraging technology that I think a lot of firms are doing now, using rebalancing software. So I use iRebal. All the accounts models are put in there for each client. Every single day it's monitoring the drift of those. I get an alert if things are out of balance beyond the tolerances that I've set. It then comes up with a suggestion of make these trades to get everything back in line, but I get to pull the trigger. So I'm looking at it and getting to say, does that really make sense? Have I had any communication with the client since that maybe they do, we're anticipating that they're gonna have need for money, so we don't wanna reinvest stuff, or we don't wanna trade, or if we are gonna trade, we wanna also get, set aside money for a future distribution. And then things just like the financial planning process. So I'm using eMoney as my financial planning software. It's got a great client portal. When I have a new prospect or client come in, they get access to it. They sync up all of their existing bank accounts, all of their 401k plans, any of their assets that are with another advisor. Right away, I can see everything. I don't have to get statements and scan them in and manually put them into the financial planning software, which then means during the meetings, I can make the plan during the meeting, right in front of them. And since a lot of my meetings are virtual anyway, it's just right in front of them. They can see my face and they can see the screen. And so we collaboratively make the plan And then it allows kind of future engagement. So when they say, well, what if I retired earlier? Or, well, it looks like I'm in a better position than I thought. What if we bought that second home? I can just do it right there. It's not, well, we can rerun that. We'll get back to you in 2 weeks. And then, oh, if you want to make more, we'll just keep going through the iterative process. It's done right there, which is a huge, huge benefit. So doing things like this will get that reliability factor up significantly. But what about the credibility? Most of us don't have PhDs or Nobel Prizes. There's still a number of things you can do there. Certainly what you're here, getting an education and working on your designations. So the three big ones are going to be your CFP, your CPA, and your CFA, depending on kind of what you want to specialize in. The CFP probably being the mandatory one going forward. On the investment strategies, almost all of these robo-advisors are doing some sort of passive modern portfolio theory. It's what most of the academic research shows. Anyone young person that goes out and tries to read books or read anything is going to come across that. So regardless of what it is, making sure that there's something to back it up. They want a repeatable process, something that's transparent that they can see, not just some prediction that you made that kind of flies in the face of all the academic research. Making sure that you implement it in a transparent way. No black boxes. They can see what you're going to invest them in. They can monitor it. They can see their holdings and transactions anytime they want. Then minimizing conflicts of interest. This goes a lot to the credibility. And this, some of this is being debated right now, kind of with the Department of Labor, of will every advisor have a fiduciary duty? Personally, I understand why, if you're an advisor, you wouldn't want that responsibility of always doing what's best for your clients. And even that doesn't eliminate all conflicts, though. Everyone has conflicts, even the fee-only advisors and assets under management. So regardless of who you're working with, structuring it so that the client never has to wonder, are you really doing it in their interest or yours or someone else's? And thinking through that in your business model, both so that you're both independent in fact and also in appearance. I don't think that compensation method alone makes you an ethical person. That would mean that all these people that claim that fee only is the only way to go, if they were thrown into a commission environment, they'd start doing horrible things for their clients. I don't think that's the case. I think it's much more innate, but don't you want your business model to align with that? And lastly, make sure you're providing more value than the fees you're charging. I think this is kind of the fear with the fee compression of these robo-advisors. Robo-advisors are charging 15 to maybe 50 basis points on the high end. If all you're doing is investment management, that's going to eventually become the new normal. That's going to be the new 1%. And so I'm not saying that's what your fees are going to be, but you need to make sure that anything above that, there's some sort of value there. And it's not necessarily outperforming the market. It can be all the, tax alpha. David Blanchett actually wrote the paper, alpha, beta, gamma, which then Vanguard has also written a bunch of stuff on, which I really think they actually mostly based off his research and didn't give him credit for it. But it's all the financial planning, the behavioral stuff. There's value in that, but it's also making sure that financial plan is really to their goals. And so after you do all that stuff, where does that leave you? You go back to that trust equation, robo-advisors versus human advisors. You get the credibility and reliability up to the same place. The thing that's left is intimacy divided by self-orientation. So that's the quality and depth of the relationship, and then whether it's about you or it's about them, whose meeting is it really? And so once you do that, that's all that's left. It's very simple kind of formula to figure out what to do. And this is where the robo-advisors are going to fall flat. They can't listen, they can't express empathy, they can't inspire, and they can't come up with creative solutions that they weren't already pre-programmed to come up with. So I think over the many decades, there's been kind of this evolution in financial planning. It started off with just what I would call investment management. The goal was more money. The value proposition was beat the market. People didn't think that much about risk even. It wasn't until the 50s with Markowitz that people even thought that diversification was a good thing. They assumed that diluted return. That's moved into what I would call kind of the current state of the profession and conventional financial planning, which is really retirement planning. There's a number tied to it, so there is a goal. We're starting to manage a portfolio to a specific goal, but it still leaves out a lot, and in a way it's kind of, it's that 9 to 5 till you're 65. Well, why wait till you're 65 to start living the life you've always wanted to live? So how instead do we make financial planning about living the life you want now, and structuring it the whole way through? And so I call this financial life planning. Some people call it life planning. Some people call it lifestyle planning. I don't know if I like the style part of that. Some people just call it financial planning done right. I mean, ultimately, what is the goal of financial planning? It's not just more money. It's ultimately a better life. And so there's actually, this isn't a formal research, but there was this nurse who worked in palliative care in Australia that started tracking she worked with people that were dying and what were their regrets as they were dying. And the number one, far and away biggest regret was, I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. So most people aren't living the life that they really want to. And so part of the goal of financial planning is helping people figure out what is that life they want to live, having that not be their regret on their, on their deathbed. And I think, as financial planners, we're particularly equipped to do that, because if you don't have the technical chops, that's the minimum bar of entry. It's why you guys are here. You're learning. You need to understand investments. You need to understand the technical side of financial planning. Otherwise, this can turn into something like therapy, or is just complete fluff and snake oil sales. But really recognizing that this is a Carl Richards sketch, that everyone's got different goals. So making sure that the financial plan really speaks to their goal, and that it's not all the cookie cutter of, we can come in and do your retirement plan in 15 minutes because all we need to know is how much money you have and what age do you want to retire? So instead of asking what age do you want to retire, how about what do you envision your life looking like in your 60s, 70s, 80s? Or what do you envision your life looking like now? Or what would you like it to look like now? And kind of going, through that stuff. So to summarize that aspect of it, it's, financial planning isn't just about money. It's about a better life. This gives clients a meaningful role in the process. We're used to clients coming to us with the questions, and we're supposed to have the answers. Now suddenly, when you don't have this preconceived notion of what the financial plan is supposed to look like, it's not just a retirement plan, they're the experts on their own life. They're the experts on what they want to do, and you're now the financial expert that creates the architecture that makes it all possible. The other result of this is clients become inspired and committed to the plan. When it's something they really want to do, they're going to implement it. In fact, I've been so surprised when, we have the meetings, we come up with a plan, they're fired up about it. We schedule another meeting for 2 weeks later, and in the meantime, I've kind of gone through my whole kind of agenda of things that I think, the action items to get there. They come into the meeting, they've already accomplished some of them without me even having to give them the push to do it, because they just want to get it done. So how do you I'll give you some examples of, kind of how you do this and what my process is, which is very much based on the training from the Kinder Institute with, George Kinder, who Rob mentioned earlier. So the very first meeting, rather than, coming in and telling them about my services and about how smart I am, that stuff's, all on the website. The credibility, the credentials, you don't need the degrees hanging on the wall. You don't need to spend the first 15 minutes talking about where you went to school and how smart you are. That's a given. Think of it as you go to the doctor. Imagine if you went to the doctor, who you only get to see for 5 or 10 minutes anyway, and he told you about how smart he was. No, instead he comes in and tells you, to drop your trousers, and you do it. I mean, the credibility should be assumed. So making that first meeting, what brings you here? Something has moved them to come into your office, some life transition, something that they're unhappy about, and leave it as open-ended as possible. And you do want to find out if there's something urgent, because there may be a financial question that has some urgency. A decision needs to be made. Maybe they have to decide between a lump sum and an annuity, and you want to make sure that you don't not address something that's urgent. But mostly it's about listen. You want them to be talking 80% of the time. So just listen. And a friend pointed out to me a few weeks ago that listen's actually just an anagram for silent, which is pretty true. And you don't want to just sit there dead, but it's much more nonverbal communication. Guttural, stating back what they said, and just letting them control almost the entire first meeting. Maybe at the end you leave a little bit of time to bring it all together, and after all, this is a financial planning meeting. Show how you're going to be able to turn that into a financial plan. But you really need to just change your mindset of how you go into it. So we often have a mentality of, what's wrong and how do we fix it? I mean, a lot of us offer like a free second opinion or review, or even so, the first meeting is, let's look at your financial life and figure out everything you're doing wrong, and then we're going to tell you how to fix it. We're going to dig a hole and throw you into it and show you that we're the only ones with the ladder out. Well, that's not a very inspiring way to get people to do anything. You may scare them, and they may think they need you, but that's not going to actually compel them to go out and live this great life. Instead, focus on what's already going well, what would be inspiring to them, and then how do you get more of that? And all those obstacles, all those, the lack of saving, the things that all will happen, but a lot of those obstacles become much easier to accomplish when they're inspired about the ultimate goal. So how do you figure out what that ultimate goal is? You unfortunately can't just ask them, what are your values? That doesn't work very well. I mean, people will give you answers. They're gonna be very kind of common things that's not really getting to the depth of it. And I remember when before I kind of found the Kinder Institute, the way I was trained at my last firm, what I thought was very, getting into the real values. We'd make a whole mind map. We'd ask clients what their goals were and their values and their interests and about all their relationships and their kids. And you'd get the values of, oh, it's freedom, or it's I want to have enough money to send my kids to school, and you get all that stuff, but it's still not getting to the heart of it. So how do you have those deeper conversations? So these are, if anyone's familiar with George Kinder at all, he's kind of become famous for these 3 questions. It's a series. They're asked in a progression. So, imagine you had all the money you need. You may not have as much money as Bill Gates or the Queen of England or, someone like that, but you have all the money to do whatever you need to do. How would you live your life? What would you change? What would you do? So take a moment and think about that for yourself. What would you do differently if you didn't really have the financial constraints? And people always assume that that's going to mean quitting your job and retiring. Well, often actually, there's usually an element of work in there. It may not be paid employment the way that we think about it, but most people have something they want to do. And the purpose of this question isn't really that this is the financial plan. In a way, this is really just to get them thinking. It's to get them dreaming, to get them starting to, get that flow going, but also to make sure that you start with that big funnel and you get everything out on the table. The next 2 questions are really starting to talk about legacy and getting to the heart of what's important to them. And so it's, the first or the second of the 3 questions is, imagine you went to the doctor, you're feeling fine, but he's been running some tests. He comes back with the unfortunate news that you have some rare disease. You've got 5 to 10 years left to live. Good news is you'll feel fine. Whatever health you're in now, you'll have for the rest of your life, but the rest of your life's only 5 to 10 years. So with this limited time, what would you do? And so, if in the first question you got, I'd quit my job and I'd, buy a second home and I'd want cars and boats and all that, this question, typically you're going to get things that are, a little bit less material. It's a lot of times relationships and family. It could be some sort of creative thing, which I would include in that entrepreneurship or starting a company. It could be writing a book. It could be, any number of things. A lot of bucket list items often come up in here. And then the third question is similar to the second. Imagine you only had 24 hours left to live. You went to the doctor, same sort of scenario, but you only have 24 hours left to live. So the question here isn't what would you do. There's not time to do anything. But it's really, what did you not get to do? What would you regret? Who did you not get to be? And really kind of speaking to that quote that I showed earlier of, what would you regret if your life was basically over? What has been left undone? And even more so here, you're going to get here's the kind of the top 5 responses. The top one is family and relationships, but that's not everyone's. It could be things about values and spirit or creativity, community, environment and place. And so, formatting got messed up. Must be the fonts. But all of them, and so on first glance, these seem like these aren't about money. So what's the point? This is financial planning. What are we doing here? But ultimately they're usually about more time. So the things with the relationships, it may be that they want to spend more time with their spouse or their kids. Well, that often means working less or rearranging your work commitments to be able to do that. It could mean less money, or more closely aligning your money with your values. And so all of these, and pretty much everything in life, is in some way related to your money. You cannot separate them. They're the opposite sides of the same coin. And so all of this ends up in the financial plan. And if you can deliver what's in that third question to people, they will trust you more than anything. They will be so fired up about their financial plan. And yes, you still have to run through all the numbers and do all that stuff, but you walk out with an inspired and excited client to do this with. So that exercise is, very stream of consciousness, very, almost right brain. There's a few other ways we kind of approach this, both to reinforce it, but also some people just engage differently. The one on the left is kind of a grid where we ask people to break up their goals into 3 different categories. Really just focus on the columns here, but heart's core, things that they're really passionate about, things that they need to do for their life to have meaning or bring fulfillment to. And so a lot of times the things that end up here are very similar to that third question or second question, but not always. The ought to column, so things where they feel a sense of responsibility, or things that they should do. Oftentimes these are the biggest obstacles holding people back from living the life that they really want to do. The other good thing about this is they're often things that are easy to delegate. So it may be things like their taxes and their money management and the complexity of their financial life, or managing, stuff with the home. Those are things that are easy to delegate. And guess what? A lot of the stress is around the money stuff and managing the money. Well, who's the perfect person to do that? You. They can delegate most of that stuff to you. The fun to column is for basically everything else. Every now and then you'll get something that seems kind of crazy and peculiar to land up here that you kind of want to dig a little deeper on, because maybe it should be in the heart's core, but it's something they're a little embarrassed about or don't think is, should be part of their financial plan. And then the exercise on the right is just kind of a depiction of, asking people to think about what would their ideal day, week, and year look like, and then how does that compare to their current day, week, and year. And the wonderful thing about this exercise is that most of these changes that people would want in their ideal day, week, and year are very small changes and very easy to accomplish. And most of them aren't going to be things that you do for them, but it's just them realizing, oh my goodness, if I woke up at this time and did this, well, that would be great. And you can start fitting in that time with the family, the things that maybe come up in the third questions without even really having to change, a lot of stuff on the financial plan. But the main takeaway is that all this is about money, but it's not just about the portfolio. It's integrating all the client's resources, their money, their time, their energy, and their skills, into one big financial life plan. And so I'll give you kind of a few kind of case studies of my own clients here, just briefly. One is a client in San Francisco. Initially came to me for stock option planning, wanted help getting out of that and figuring out what the investment should be. And they wanted to buy an apartment. So I went through the exercise list, and the things that came up in the third question in that heart's core column, where they wanted to get married, have children, and when they had children, they wanted to be able to take some time off to be with the children when they were grown up. They didn't want, I'm not sure if they were looking at a prior experience or what. They were like, I don't want my kid to be involved with drugs. I want to be there when they're growing up, and I don't care if it means I have to work later when they're in college. I'd rather be there for those younger years, so I want that flexibility. And then just general flexibility and freedom in their lives, being able to change a job that's not right, or move, or basically having some of that dry powder there. And in the ought to column was buy a home, which I thought was particularly fascinating because initially they had said one of the things they wanted help doing was figuring out how to buy an apartment. And so I asked them a little bit more about this, and it's like, well, this is, real estate prices in San Francisco just keep going up, and all my friends are buying homes, and my dad, he's owned several homes, and he says it's the best investment, and real estate only goes up, and blah, blah, blah. But it turned out that they didn't really want to. In fact, as we went through the numbers, they were going to lose a lot of that freedom and flexibility, which were the things that were in that third question. The freedom and flexibility just in general, but also that someday when they had kids, to be able to spend time with them. And just realizing by going through these exercises, well, geez, I don't want to buy a home. That wasn't my goal. That was my parents' goal, and my friend who's the realtor that keeps sending me stuff. And yeah, I got excited every time he sent me a house, and wouldn't that be so fun to go live in? But ultimately, that would have locked me into something that would take away everything that was most important to me. And so the financial plan, we kept a lot of money in short-term stuff, CDs, and to allow, for a wedding at some point, and to have the ability, if they wanted to have a down payment later on, but also just to maintain that flexibility. And if we'd instead not asked those questions, we would have helped them buy the apartment, and who knows how they'd feel about that decision now. Another one was a couple that came to me, with their primary goals being college savings, again, managing investments, and then help with all the insurance and estate plan. They had young kids and hadn't gotten that stuff in order. And so, yeah, for him, the big thing was, time with his children. He also said he wanted to take so this is the third question, what would you regret? He wanted to take a big professional risk that would help other people regardless of whether or not it worked out. He had made pretty good money. He didn't have enough money to retire by any means, but wanted to be in a position where he could take that job at a company that he thought had a really good mission, that he would feel really good about without having to demand financial security as well. Feel great every day. This came up like on his ideal day, week, and year. He wanted to be able to bike to work and be able to cook his own meals and all that stuff. And the wife, she said, in her third question, the only thing, what would you regret? She wants to live abroad with her family for an extended period of time. Definitely wouldn't have come up in the other stuff. And in the ought to column was save for the future and earn the maximum to provide for the family, which seemed to be in direct conflict to the, be able to take that professional risk and certainly to be able to, to spend some time abroad. And so, we didn't do anything right away other than just get this out on the table. They were not ready to make any career changes, and they weren't ready to go abroad. We just kind of I let it sit with them. And we just, did some other planning, and nothing kind of permanent. And when we met a few months later, they came back to me, and he was interviewing with companies that he thought were great, and they had also booked a 1-month trip to Europe where they were had rented like a VRBO, Airbnb place to kind of test it out. And when they got back, they said that was the most wonderful trip ever. It actually only cost us as much as it would have to go on a week of our normal vacations. And she also realized, I don't want to spend like 2 years abroad. 1 month was plenty. But guess what? There's no longer going to be a regret. She got to do it, and I'm sure they'll do something like that again at some point. And he's now taken a job where he's actually making more money now, but it is a startup company. But it's a project that he's extremely passionate and excited about. He gets to ride his bike to work in the summer and absolutely loves it. And I didn't do anything. I didn't help them do any of these things. All I did was do the actual technical planning. All I did was ask these questions and plant those seeds. They solved all their own problems. They took all their own action. Yet they attributed it all to me somehow. And this particular client, I've gotten several referrals exactly and I never called it life planning or financial life planning to them. I just called it financial planning. I've gotten several referrals. You got to talk to David. He's helped us with so much more than just the financial stuff, although he's pretty good at that stuff too. So it really, talk about referrals and building trust. It works. The last is kind of mine, and it's why I started on this. I was in California. I was an accounting major. I went and worked for the Big Four. Wanted to be the CEO or CFO of some big company. Wanted to make $1 million a year. Wanted, the San Francisco Bay Area lifestyle. And, I actually initially heard of this whole thing. I don't know if people are familiar with Carl Richards, who does all those sketches. Those two of them were in here. But he was talking at a conference I went to a couple years ago, and was talking to him afterwards about, geez, so all the stuff you're saying sounds really good, but how do you actually learn this stuff? Like, I didn't learn any of this stuff in my business school. I haven't learned any of it when I was studying for the CFP. And he said, yeah, there's not really any place to do it. And George Kinder was one of the few names that he said, he has a program, he's written a few books, back in the 90s too. So this is starting to become more talked about with this whole robo-revolution. Stuff's been around for 20 years. And people have been doing it for 20 years. So I read George Kinder's books, and even before kind of formally kind of going through the, a planning process, I asked myself those questions, and my wife we went through it together. And, for me, it was, I wanted to be able to spend time with my wife, and we don't have kids yet, but eventually have that flexibility to go to their games or, be there while they're growing up. And I saw that the lifestyle that I was living in California was working a ton, and I saw the people above me never had time to do any of that stuff. And, even my boss, who is a huge mentor of mine and I respect a lot, basically saying this is not a lifestyle business. Like, this company will never be where, we run lean and mean, and that's why we make good money. And I also wanted a home. I had moved from Maine, right about when I graduated from college and went to work, lost my mother to cancer. So I didn't really have like a home to go back to in general. So for me, I really wanted to just have a home and a place that felt like home. And looking in California and San Francisco, that was, over $1 million to get that. And so moving eventually to the Midwest and buying a home in St. Louis solved that problem pretty quickly. But really also wanted to be able to make a meaningful difference, work with clients that I wanted to work with in the way I thought was best, and have that flexibility, that work-life integration. It wasn't about working less. I absolutely love my job. I think I have the best job in the world, and can't believe people are willing to pay me to do it. But wanted that flexibility to do it. And so really it was first about living my own life plan, and then at first I wasn't doing this for clients. I was doing it the way I'd always been taught, and at some point I was like, geez, this is what works, this is what I want, this is what everyone wants, whether they realize it initially or not. So it's been life-changing for me, and I think life-changing for at least some of my clients. So that's the formal presentation. I think I've got time for questions here, and can go into depth on any of those topics a little bit more.
How old are you?
28.
Thank you.
I totally agree with this concept. It's it's the way to keep clients, is the way to identify with them on a more personal level. So I get it completely. I did want to ask you though about your experience with dealing with clients, like you mentioned in California, where you're not physically with them.
Yeah.
So the video conferencing, all that stuff. I mean, you find that to be very effective, or do you have to do like a personal meeting first and then do the video conferencing?
Yeah. So I mean. This whole virtual office thing is also a hot topic, and I've talked a bit about it before. I never set out to create a virtual practice. It was more of because I was leaving and my network was in California, that it was kind of a necessity, and I was thankful that there was video conferencing technology that was worked pretty well by this point. So most of my clients I have met in person, but a lot of them I didn't meet initially. I met them after we were already working together. The initial meetings where I was asking these questions was on video conferencing. And that's what I alluded to earlier, that I would argue that a lot of the conversations I'm having are at a much deeper level via video than most advisors are having in their office. And certainly it'd be better in person. This always works better in person. And part of that whole listening thing is after you asking a question, not filling that awkward silence with you talking. It's kind of pausing. And I remember one of the times when I was working with a client, paused after, to give them just a moment to ponder it, and they go, "Are you still there? Did we lose you?" Because, technology goes out a lot. And so there certainly are some hiccups to it, but what's the alternative? It would be not working with those clients at all. And so I think it would be very hard to do via phone because there's so much cues you just pick up visually from body language and all that. But video conferencing actually works really well.
I think that the concept of the robo-planner is very interesting to me. My grandmother, who apparently has just discovered the internet, was on there, and she knows that I'm interested in financial planning. And she was telling me about all these different websites that she's seen advertisements for about investment planning through the internet and stuff like that. How do you sell that added value as a financial advisor, that added value of the intimacy portion of that equation?
I don't. It's all through showing them. The reason most clients don't initially come to me because of my approach to financial planning, unless they got referred, by someone kind of mentioning that stuff. They're coming to me for the technical stuff still. They're not expecting this, but once they get it, they're like, "Oh my God!" I mean, people have described this type of process like the conversation of a lifetime. It's not a conversation they're expecting to have. They've never had those conversations in a financial planner's office before, or perhaps anywhere. And when you go in the first meetings, like, it's not about me, it's not about my products, it's not about my services, it's about you. Tell me what's going on. And they're talking 80% of that meeting. They walk out of there like, "You are so smart." And you're like, "I didn't do anything yet." And then by the second meeting, you show them the plan, you put the numbers, here's how we can accomplish this. They're probably not going anywhere else. I mean, if you think about the reputation that, and I'm lumping all financial services people together here, that we have in the public, it's not generally that good. In fact, there was a Gallup study a couple years ago of the least trusted professions. We were the third from the bottom. You know who we beat? Used car salesmen and politicians, Congress. So the fact that they are in your office and they're already talking to you, you've already overcome all of that. You don't need to sell all of the experience and credentials. You need to have all that stuff, because if you aren't able to deliver a plan, then you're going to turn it into a therapy session, or you're just delivering them fluff without any substance behind it. And I very much think you need the technical side, and that's why I think financial planners are especially well suited to kind of deliver this. Not, life coaching is kind of a thing, and there's some elements of that are similar to this. You're not doing the accountability on weekly check-ins and that type of stuff as much. But there's certainly elements in figuring out what they want their life to look like and delivering that. But most people won't go out and do that because they don't know how to connect all the dots in terms of the numbers. And so that's where you can really come in with the expertise.
Yeah, I guess it's just interesting to me the competition. I mean, on the
Oh, yeah.
on the outside, it would seem like it would be easier to go through a website or go through an automated financial planner and just how it is that you have a competitive advantage against that.
Yeah, and some of this, I send out those questions ahead of time, and actually, the Kinder Institute has a website, Life Planning for You, that asks these same type of questions as well as a bunch of other exercises. It's free to consumers to basically go on, you can even theoretically do this kind of life planning approach on your own. The thing that I found, though, is that people kind of get to doing those exercises, and then it comes time, George calls it lighting the torch, where you kind of take all that stuff and sum it up and almost paint the picture back. Imagine if your life looked like this. How would that be? What if we could do this for you? Was that what you'd want? And people have a hard time doing that pulling it all together on their own. It's much more impactful when you say, what if we could do this? And you paint the picture for them. They're like, oh my God, that'd be amazing. And so there's still that human piece of being able to pull that stuff. That's kind of the creativity, unless that's already programmed into the algorithm, how can a computer do that? You're pulling from so many different places in the client's life and the experiences that it's going to be very hard to replicate with the same amount of kind of passion and power behind it. But without a doubt, I think there probably will be some fee compression. I don't know if it's in the next couple of years or if it's going to be 20 years away, but if you're really just doing investment management, you do need to justify the additional cost. And that doesn't mean justify it with additional return necessarily. It could be that you're helping them live a much more fulfilled and meaningful life, but there are also areas, technical ways that you can add additional value there, and that's that whole gamma thing that David Blanchett's written about with taxes. And that's, again, we're having the technical background of being able to structure the portfolios and all the how all the pieces come together. We're able to save money on taxes, and there's certainly the behavioral component of it. But that's also another hard one to sell because clients think they're not going to have behavioral problems. It's just something that you have to do anyway. Yeah.
Again, having been in the industry for a few years, this is how to do it. I think most of the folks in here are students. This is a perfect model that a good quality financial planning practice would model. There's a couple of important things that he's brought up and some other people have brought up that for students in particular, I think would be really, really valuable. I was at a similar event in Chicago a couple of days ago with University of Illinois students, and they had a gentleman there named Caleb Brown that spoke, that his company is New Planner Recruiting. And he gave a lot of very appropriate ideas to the students that are graduating on how they can get a leg up. So going to George Kinder's site, and the name of it again was?
Life Planning for You, I think it's .com.
Right.
Just search for
Going to that site and becoming familiar with it is going to be experience that you can present at an interview. Going to Easy Money and taking out a trial version of that software and putting in your information or your parents' information or makeup information is experience for you. Going to the FPA website and learning about what consumer information is there, or the Fidelity website and learning about investments there. All of that is non-classroom activity that for me, hiring, I'd hire somebody with those dynamics and I wouldn't even bother looking at a GPA. So there's all kinds of things that are available for you to tap into as students that are going to make you infinitely more marketable than the people, than the rest of the folks that are out there.
Yeah, I would check out George's website, Life Planning. It's free for consumers, which he's very much a believer that everyone, often a question we get, I'm almost surprised that no one's asked it yet, isn't this only for rich people? Because other people can't quit their jobs and but the response is, doesn't everybody have dreams and life aspirations, and even so shouldn't those lead the planning process? This isn't saying, follow your passion and throw all caution in the wind and, don't think about finances. It's saying no, but your life aspirations and what's in your heart is very important, and let's make sure we build a strong financial plan around that. Most people aren't going to be able to quit their jobs and just pursue exactly what's in their third question, their full extent, but we want to get closer and closer to that and figure out a way to incorporate it. And so just going to that website and putting in, doing your own kind of life plan will probably give you a lot of clarity on your own life. And in reality, this is another place where robo-advice, is actually good. I initially would ask these questions just verbally in the meeting, and you get pretty good responses, but I found that when I sent them out ahead of time, I got much, much deeper responses because people are typing in a computer, they're pondering it, they're taking the time, and at the time they're writing it, it seems anonymous to them, and then they get it on paper, and they send it to me, and then I read it back to them, and I get much, much greater depth to the point that even just simply reading someone's response back to them verbatim, you occasionally will get, tears in their eyes. And so, great example of technology. In that point, it actually is kind of separating the human element to just give them some time for introspection and then kind of sharing it with you. And so, George's site he also allows advisors to plug in for a very nominal fee that want to use his software kind of integrated in. I have it built into my own system, so I don't, but I use it the same way. Any other questions? Yeah.
What motivated you to become, have an independent business as opposed to being a financial planner for maybe an already established?
Yeah. Well, I did work at an RIA. So after I left Deloitte in California, I worked at an RIA that did, comprehensive wealth management, in more the conventional sense of kind of the technical stuff. And it was for me, going through my own, it was really having that flexibility to be able to spend my time, always being able to prioritize my time. I work way more now even than I did before, but I like it, and I get to do it when the time makes sense. And I don't have kids yet, but that's probably next on the docket. And I'm not making as much money yet as I was before. And so that's actually part of why it was my wife that gave me the kick to do it. She said, if you're really going to do it now because we don't have kids. And so, again, it was in a way that if I hadn't thought of this before, I'd probably end up in a midlife crisis being like, oh my God, I need to do this. And now how do I do it? I've got all these expenses and I'm locked into, and to me, kind of linking it back to the talks this morning with all the student debt, that's to me the scariest thing about, our generation is people coming out with debt that they're going to be locked into jobs that they hate and never get to kind of follow, what they really want to do or feel like they can't. But
I think I'd add one thing to this discussion.
Yeah.
Since we're talking to students that are going to go out and do this. Someone told me a long time ago, and it really rings true, because I have my own practice, and clients will never leave you for performance. They will leave you because they do not feel loved.
mm-hmm.
And that's true. That is so true. Like, my clients care more about that I know their grandkids' names and what's going on in their life, and they're able to do all the things that they can do. And so if you go into this career thinking from that perspective, you will be successful. Because people see right through you, too. And you got to genuinely care.
That's absolutely right. And so then it's on you to make sure that there's that stuff. They won't leave you for performance, but in my mind, that's still, that stuff should all be there, which is why the robo-advice is being successful with kind of the more passive methodology. You can't, it's from a business standpoint, get away from the theoretical and what's better, but from a business standpoint, you have no underperformance risk. It really does make it all about then the relationship. And you're right, they won't leave you as long as it's an authentic relationship. And so, initially, in my mind, sales used to be a dirty word, and kind of it still is. I don't like it, but those same skills are basically sales skills. It's just that you're doing it in an authentic relationship, really what's looking best for the client. And I think where that trust has been broken is that people have developed those intimate relationships as a way to manipulate them to do stuff that's not in their best interest, and then that actually damages it way more. And it's unfortunately why I think as a profession we're not that trusted, and why we need to, I think it's Carl Richards that I heard say, when people ask him, how do I build trust? Because obviously that's the most important piece of it. And he kind of arrogantly says, well, start by being trustworthy. be credible, do what you're going to say you're going to do what's in the client's best interest, and develop a real relationship. And you will be surprised. Stuff just, I mean, it's, if anyone's ever read The Alchemist, you know, there's the quote in there that when you're on your path, the world just conspires to, you know, to help you be successful, and it's amazing things start happening. So.
Dave, I've got a question.
Yeah.
I look at these case studies, and it's like, and I'm reminded of clients that I've met with myself, where you look at the case study, it's like a mono person. This is what they want to do. This is what we have with them. I've met with clients and sit down with him and her, and I'll ask them the question like, "What are your goals?
Mm-hmm.
What do you want your money to do?" And they look at each other like deer in the headlights, sort of like they've never talked about that before.
Right.
And so, kind of my question is how do you handle the disagreements between him and her,
Great
and also
question.
how much time do you set aside for that first face-to-face meeting?
Yeah, so I usually block out 2 hours, and I try to keep it to under an hour and a half. And with regards to couples, yeah, I think actually we sometimes, you know, don't get by it, and, you know, the stereotypical is, you know, that the wife doesn't come and the husband makes all the decisions, and that's definitely not true in all relationships. But how do you make sure that, you know, both individuals get to live their life plan? And so as I'm going through these questions, when I kind of set the stage, I say, you know, first I'm going to work with one of you, and we kind of go through the whole process, and I kind of then paint the picture of, so this is kind of what you want, and then I go to the other, and it's only after I've kind of got the clarity for both of them individually do we kind of bring it together into the joint financial plan. Because if you just ask for what are your joint goals and your joint life vision, someone's usually gets stifled. And unfortunately, the person that gets stifled generally isn't going to be it's going to be the less dominant person, and you may not even know that happened. So especially if I can kind of sense that there's not so much of an equal footing, I'll sometimes trigger them saying, you know, so who usually would go first in this type of situation? And whoever says they would, I said, all right, well, let's start with you and go to the other person to make sure that person gets to talk first and isn't going to, you know, have their opinion altered.
Are there any other questions? If not, let's thank David for coming down.